President Zelensky of Ukraine is headed to the U.S. today to be speaking in front of Congress. This all comes as President Biden and his administration are currently trying to force through a over 4,000-page omnibus bill that will fund the government for the next year. This bill has all sorts of stuff in it. Again, it's 4,000 pages long. It was just released yesterday. They're hoping to vote on it by Friday. You can do the math, trying to go through all of this and all of the stuff that is going to be lumped into this massive, massive bill. It's full of all sorts of stuff that we're able to see right now, but there's also going to be so much more that's going to slip through the cracks here. I'm going to go through a couple of the different things that are in the bill, kind of give you my take on them. We're also going to talk a little bit about why the timing of Zelensky coming, as this bill includes a lot of funding for Ukraine and the war going on there, and why he might be coming right now for this. But first, let's get into an article here from CNN that kind of outlines a bit of what is in the bill. And as we go through this, I'm going to kind of add a little bit more context to each of them as we go. Colin, we can go ahead and pull up that article from CNN. So as you can see in the bill here, the first is aid for Ukraine. I'm going to save that for the end because I have some thoughts about why this is being lumped into this one bill and not its own separate thing. But as you can see here, we've got things such as emergency disaster assistance, overhaul of the electoral vote counting law. Emergency disaster assistance, no one's going to be upset about that sort of thing. That sort of thing is included in all of these budgets. The first one that really caught my attention was funding for the January 6th attack prosecutions. The bill would provide $2.6 billion for U.S. attorneys, which would include funding efforts to, quote, further support prosecutions related to the January 6th attack on the Capitol and domestic terrorism cases, according to a fact sheet. The bill also gives $11.3 billion to the federal government, or the Federal Bureau of Investigation, including for efforts to investigate extremist violence and domestic terrorism. I mean, yes, January 6th was an important event in the history of this country, but do I think $2.6 billion now, 2 years after the fact, should be put in to be given to attorneys directly here? Like, how much can you do with $2.6 billion rather than spending it on attorneys? For example, you saw a lot of my reporting this summer from Jackson, Mississippi. The estimated cost to repair their water system, less than that, $1 billion. Why are we spending $2.6 billion? Again, I think January 6th is important, right? But spending $2.6 billion on attorneys alone to help prosecute some of these cases that, some of them, yes, should be go ahead and prosecuted. Some of them are just people who have been listening to conspiracy theories for years and years and years from folks on the internet and from folks on cable news going out and doing something. And then, many of them maybe now realizing, wow, I can't believe what I was thinking. Seems like a waste of money. I do think we should be prosecuting the people planning and doing all sorts of attacks and stuff like this. But spending literally almost $3 billion on attorneys is an absolute waste of money. This goes on here. There's a couple things in here that, man, for a bill that is being passed through the lame duck, which is still controlled by Democrats in the House, Democrats in the Senate, and a President Biden, you would think that these sorts of things would not be in this and that this might be a Republican bill. This one right here, changes to Medicaid and other healthcare programs. The spending bill would phase out the requirement that prevented states from disenrolling Medicaid recipients as long as the national public health emergency was in effect in exchange for an enhanced federal match. This continuous coverage measure was enacted as part of a COVID-19 relief package passed in March 2020 and has led to a record 90 million Medicaid enrollees. Under the spending bill, states would be able to start evaluating Medicaid enrollees' eligibility as of April 1st. The redetermination process would take over at least 12 months. The measure also calls for phasing down the enhanced federal Medicaid funding through December 31st, 2023, though the states would have to meet certain conditions during that period. Up to 19 million people could lose their Medicaid benefits, according to the estimates, though many would be eligible for other coverage. Now, I've got some thoughts on this one. As someone who a couple years ago was actually on Medicaid for a period of time, in between, I had a year where I wasn't making very much money. It was I essentially qualified to be able to be on Medicaid. And man, can I tell you how difficult it is to stay on Medicaid when you're right on that weird threshold of making just enough money or just too much money, because if you're under the certain amount of money, you're okay, you're good on Medicaid. If you make $500 or $1,000 more and you didn't report it immediately, you can very easily lose your coverage, and then you need to go ahead and enroll through healthcare.gov, but you have to do it before a certain day of the month, and yada, yada, yada. And a lot of people, if you're at that income threshold, where I was at that point in time, are not thinking about like, okay, I need to make sure that I fill out this paperwork and mail this in on the specific day and all of this sort of stuff. And they very easily lose their healthcare coverage. And then all of a sudden something happens, they go to the hospital, and it's like, well, you're no longer on Medicaid. You didn't go through and fill this out on healthcare.gov. This is something that, like, okay, if you want to get rid of the pandemic era restrictions at some point, makes sense to me, right? But like, let's do it while also like passing something in conjunction with it that prevents these people from falling through the cracks in the system. There's probably more to read about this, but again, potentially 19 million people are going to lose their coverage. It says that they might be eligible for other coverage, but how are they going to know if they're eligible? What forms are they going to have to go fill out? It's a bureaucratic nightmare trying to be on some of these programs. Again, I've got firsthand experience with it. I know a lot of others who have. Now I'm on a marketplace plan, but man, you'd think the Democrats who supposedly want everyone to be covered under healthcare should be not doing this, and instead they're doing exactly the opposite. Another one here that caught my attention too, big help for all of you who are applying for grants and going to college, higher maximum Pell Grant awards. This bill would increase the maximum Pell Grant award by a whopping $500 for the coming school year. Wow, that extra $500 when college is $30,000 is really going to do a whole lot, but they're going to be able to now go out and be like, yeah, we gave everyone $500. Sorry, the executive order that we signed ended up getting caught in the courts. Who knows where that's going to go at this point? If this goes to the Supreme Court, very likely going to disappear, and very likely the Biden administration was able to run on, we're canceling, $10,000 to $20,000 of your student debt, blah, 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 blah. Folks, I'll get out and vote for them on that and several other issues that I've talked about extensively on this channel, including abortion, which they forgot about and decided to do nothing about days later. $15 minimum wage that Bernie Sanders got verbal support from Biden for when he endorsed him. We've heard nothing about that. This is another one of those things. It's like, well, sorry guys, we weren't able to get the 10 to 20,000, but like we will give an extra $500 in Pell Grants to students who right now are qualifying for them. It's a joke, but whatever. I thought that was interesting. A win for veterans here. Increase in healthcare spending for the VA medical, as well as a pay raise for troops. And then the next couple here, I think, are a little bit lumped together, or they should have been kind of lumped together. I'm not going to read each of the sections here, but we've got beefing up nutrition assistance, more money for childcare, help to pay utility bills, okay? These three they all sound great, right? Yes, we want to be helping folks in each of these areas, but one thing that was helping folks in each of these areas that didn't require them to go sign up for 3 separate programs, very likely with this, was the child tax credit, right? The child tax credit was wildly popular. And again, this is being passed through the lame duck Congress that's happening right now. Democrats have control over both chambers of Congress, and Joe Biden, last I checked, is still president of the United States. Why are they doing all of these piecemeal things that include a whole bunch of bureaucracy involved, and people run into the reporting problems like I mentioned earlier, running into with Medicaid, and just tack the child tax credit back into this thing, right? Like, that would give people the money to solve those problems on their own, right? They'd be able to buy more food for their family. They'd be able to pay for their heating costs. They'd be able to pay for childcare. Instead, it's this program that's going to have weird eligibility requirements. You're going to have to fill out a whole bunch of paperwork to do it. And frankly, people don't have time for it. And the government generally does a pretty piss poor job of getting the message out at what these people actually need to do. Again, I think these things are important, that they should be included in, but there was a much more clear way to do it that is easier from an implementation standpoint on the government side, because all they need to do is send checks out. And it's also better for the recipients because they're just sending them cash to solve their own problems. Like, it's not rocket science. This should be a pretty straightforward thing to do. There's a couple other things mentioned in this article that are in the bill. A few things that weren't in the bill as well. There was also talk about potentially adding in some cannabis banking type provisions to make it easier for cannabis-based businesses across the U.S. Over 40 states have some sort of legal cannabis, but they're still not allowed to use the banking system. That seems like it would have been a clear win, but not included. But let's tie this back into Zelensky here visiting the U.S. and the Ukraine funding that is actually also tied into this bill. So on top of all of that, also included in this bill is an additional roughly $50 billion in spending to Ukraine. As I mentioned at the start of the video, President Zelensky from Ukraine coming to Congress to come and speak about an update on what's going on there, and very likely to help increase some support for the bill in both chambers of Congress, which I expect to pass kind of no problem. We'll ultimately see, but this is days before the holidays. Even the people who are against this sort of thing, which, generally speaking, I'm very much against, like, lumping so much into this at the last minute. This should be a much more transparent process and should have been dealt with weeks ago, months ago, really. But to help kind of bolster some support, it definitely makes sense from the perspective of folks in Congress who are trying to get more money to Ukraine to do this now rather than later. But I just want to kind of put into perspective here how much the U.S. has been spending in Ukraine so far. Especially in comparison to other countries in the world. Now, I'm absolutely sympathetic to the cause going on here, but we also have tons of major issues going on in the United States that seemingly can't get the funding. I mentioned one of them earlier with Jackson. What's going on at the border right now could certainly use a lot of help. There are still places across the country, homelessness in a lot of places. We're not spending the money there at all. Or they say they're spending the money there and it ends up in some organization that's ultimately not solving the problem. But the amount that has been spent so far, Colin, we can pull up, there's this chart here, just how much the U.S. has sent in aid to Ukraine. Total of $48 billion before. And we're about to tack on another roughly that amount with the passage of this bill. So we'll be at nearly $100 billion so far if this bill passes. Will have been sent to Ukraine. Again, absolutely sympathetic of the cause, but this is a war that's being fought in Europe, right next to a lot of European countries that have some of the highest GDP, like countries like Germany, the UK. Now, these countries are chipping in, but let's compare here on this chart further down, Colin. U.S. aid to Ukraine far exceeds that from other countries. You've got the United States, and again, this is before the bill that's going on right now. So U.S. aid is currently roughly $50 billion. That line is going to be double the length after the passage of this. EU institutions, so that basically anyone who's a member of the European Union has spent $30 billion so far, which is $20 billion less than the United States, and this war is in their backyard. The United Kingdom has spent, and let me be clear here too, a lot of these countries down below are part of the EU institutions funding here. They're just showing it here so you can do it. So it's not like EU institutions have put in $30 billion, and then on top of it, separately, the United Kingdom and Germany and Canada, or Canada's not part of the UE, but EU, but Poland, France, those numbers from those countries below, minus the UK, because the UK is no longer part of the EU, are what makes up a lot of this funding. So this is a absolute just unbalanced amount of spending. A lot of this, yes, I want to keep saying this because I don't want to be painted as someone who's not sympathetic to this cause. I think Putin is a madman and he's committing war crimes left and right. We absolutely should be supporting these folks. But to the level that we are, it seems overly excessive. And it also serves a major purpose for a lot of these members in Congress. A lot of this money that's going there is being spent with major defense contractors in the U.S., who all of these members of Congress are going to have cushy board seats at in the next 5 to 10 years as they lose their races or retire from Congress, which, I mean, at this rate, they're going to die before that happens because they're all running until they're 75 years old. These people are standing to benefit from this. They're getting donations from these defense contractors left and right. So it's just continuing to fund the massive military industrial complex and all of this going on. And frankly, who knows exactly what all of this is being spent on there, right? We're not getting like detailed reports back about where the dollars are being spent. Again, absolutely sympathetic to the cause in Ukraine. Think we should be sending them money. But an extra $50 billion, like that's as much as we've spent already. We're doubling it right now. And it's going to be far more than double or even triple what all of the rest of the countries in the world are spending on this. And it's much closer to home for them. A little bit interesting. If you're interested in learning more about government spending as a whole and how all of that system works, we've got a ton of great content from Steve Grumbine on the channel with talking about MMT and all sorts of stuff like that. We'll definitely, maybe I'll have Colin include some links to some of those videos. You can check some of those out. Otherwise, we'll ultimately see where this bill goes. My guess is I think it's going to pass. The money to Ukraine will pass. But it's just interesting to me to see the Democrats not doing things that they generally campaign on. Again, the like Medicaid expiration, not including the child tax credit, throwing a couple bones, we'll give you $500 off your student loans, even though up to 10 to 20,000 is currently stalled in the courts, and I'm not convinced it's ever going to make it to us. We'll ultimately see what happens with all of it. I'm on the road right now, obviously not in my normal spot. I'm staying with some family for the holidays up in northern New Hampshire. If you're traveling for the holidays, definitely be safe on your travels. Show up to the airport early because it's getting crazy busy. I was just dealing with all of that yesterday. You can give me a follow on Twitter at LewisD217. Make sure you're subscribed down below. Click the bell after you've done so. Keep an eye out for some of our live streams coming up this week. As this bill kind of goes through Congress, we'll definitely be keeping you updated. Thank you guys very much for watching, and have a great day.